The heartland of America faces a seismic economic shift as presidential policies and global supply chains collide in ways few could have anticipated, revealing what might be the future of manufacturing in our increasingly interconnected world. The iconic green tractors that once symbolized American agricultural might now find themselves at the center of an international trade dispute that could reshape farming economics for generations to come. Behind closed doors in Washington and corporate boardrooms across the Midwest, decisions are being made that will affect the price of every bushel of grain and gallon of milk produced on American soil. Stay with us as we unravel how international trade policies are creating ripple effects that could soon reach your dinner table in ways you might never have imagined. The story of American manufacturing has always been one of adaptation and innovation, from small forges and workshops to global industrial powerhouses that change the world. Since 1837, John Deere has embodied this evolution, transforming from a blacksmith shop in Illinois to become the world's largest agricultural machinery manufacturer in the 21st century. Those familiar green tractors and combines have become as quintessentially American as red barns dotting the countryside and amber waves of grain stretching to the horizon. If you're finding this analysis valuable for understanding how global trade affects American agriculture and manufacturing, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell, as your support allows us to continue bringing you these in-depth economic perspectives that you won't find anywhere else. Yet beneath the iconic green paint lies a complex global production network that spans continents and crosses borders with remarkable efficiency. Precision-engineered steel components from Japan and South Korea, specialized engine parts from Germany, sophisticated electronic control units from Malaysia, and increasingly, fully assembled components from Mexico supply North and South American markets in a cost-effective manner. This strategic shift toward nearshore outsourcing was a pragmatic response to rising labor costs in the United States, placing the agricultural equipment giant on a collision course with President Trump's uncompromising trade agenda. When Trump took office in January 2025 for his second non-consecutive term, he arrived with an action plan heavily influenced by his chief trade advisor, Peter Navarro, and inspired by the controversial Project 2025 blueprint. This vision of fair trade called for sweeping reciprocal tariffs, beginning with 10% on all imports as a baseline, potentially rising to 20% or more for countries with which the United States maintains significant trade deficits, such as the European Union and China. The plan notably included provisions for punitive 200% tariffs on any American company relocating its production overseas, an explicit threat aimed at corporations like General Motors and John Deere that had shifted manufacturing operations to Mexico or other low-cost countries. Economists across the political spectrum cautioned that such extreme measures would likely backfire, increasing costs for American consumers and creating chaos throughout supply chains that had been optimized over decades of globalization. Nevertheless, Trump's rhetoric only intensified as his administration settled into power during the early months of 2025. On April 2, 2025, Trump signed an executive order implementing his reciprocal tariff program, establishing the 10% threshold for all imports effective April 5th, with customized surcharges at equitable rates for heavily deficit countries. This same order stipulated that any American company offshoring a significant portion of its production would be subject to a retroactive 200% tax on goods reimported into the United States. Commerce Secretary Gina Raymond, who under the previous administration had advocated for pragmatic trade negotiations, was now tasked with implementing these aggressive measures against the advice of many career officials in her department. John Deere's leadership had long analyzed its production footprint to optimize costs and responsiveness to market demand across its global operations. Facing rising wages in the United States and duty-free access granted by the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, the successor to NAFTA, it made economic sense for Deere to expand its assembly lines for medium-sized tractors and combines destined for the American Midwest by 2024. This strategic decision saved thousands of dollars per machine, allowing Deere to offer competitive prices to financially struggling farmers still grappling with depressed commodity prices and challenging growing conditions across the grain belt. But when Navarro publicly threatened punitive 200% tariffs on tractors assembled in Mexico, company executives were caught flat-footed and scrambling to develop contingency plans that could preserve both profitability and market share. A Deere spokesperson told Reuters on April 5th, "We are carefully evaluating these new policies and will work collaboratively with the administration to find solutions that protect both American jobs and the needs of our customers," while internally, engineers and plant managers rush to estimate the financial impact of a 200% tax on 200,000 tractors, effectively adding $400,000 per unit, making Deere products unaffordable for many rural dealerships. The threat of skyrocketing prices triggered a rush to purchase existing inventories manufactured in Mexico before tariffs took effect, creating a distortion in the market that benefited neither manufacturers nor consumers in the long term. In the week following the April 5th announcement, tractor deliveries to the United States jumped by more than 15% compared to the previous year as farmers feared paying double for their new machinery when current stocks were depleted. Yet these preventive purchases only exacerbated uncertainty, raising questions about retroactive application and who would ultimately bear the cost if tariffs were imposed on equipment already in the pipeline or recently delivered to American farms. It's the farmers, Deere's customers, who ultimately suffer the consequences of this political whiplash, remarked an industry analyst watching the situation unfold across America's agricultural heartland. American grain producers, already reeling from years of low corn and soybean prices, had been hoping for a recovery in equipment spending as improved yields and expanding export markets slowly boosted farm incomes after several challenging seasons. But their plans were now thrown into disarray by tariff threats that created impossible choices for farm operations already operating on tight margins and careful capital expenditure planning. Should they invest in new Deere machinery at current prices, risking a massive retroactive tariff, or delay purchases and cope with aging equipment and productivity losses during critical planting and harvesting windows when every hour of downtime translates to potential yield reductions? At a recent agricultural expo in Kansas City, dealers reported that many producers were sitting on the sidelines, unwilling to commit to major investments amid tariff uncertainty that could dramatically alter the economics of their operations overnight. "I have a waiting list of 10 farmers who want X-Series tractors," said a Midwest dealer, showcasing the latest Deere technology. "But if Trump imposes 200% duties on Mexican-made machines, those orders will vanish in a heartbeat, leaving both my dealership and those farm operations in limbo regarding equipment plans." State farm bureaus began lobbying the White House directly, demanding exemptions for agricultural machinery and arguing that punitive taxes on tractors would harm domestic production more than foreign competition in a sector where American farmers already competed globally with producers facing lower input costs. American farmers cannot possibly pay $600,000 for a tractor and survive, the Illinois Farm Bureau testified before Congress on April 15th, highlighting the existential threat that equipment tariffs posed to the viability of family farms already struggling with generational transition and consolidation pressures. Yet Republicans close to Trump remained reluctant to support any exemptions, fearing such carve-outs would undermine administration negotiators at the World Trade Organization and in bilateral negotiations, sending the message that the president's tariff threats were hollow political gestures rather than serious policy positions. Facing this existential business risk, John Deere deployed a multifaceted strategy to navigate the treacherous waters of shifting trade policy while maintaining its market position and relationships with multi-generational farming families who depended on their equipment. First, the company accelerated plans to repatriate certain final assembly operations to its American plants in Waterloo, Iowa, and Moline, Illinois, despite higher labor costs, offering a tariff-free pathway for critical models that farmers needed for the upcoming growing season. Deere's chief financial officer Ryan Campbell confirmed during an April 20th earnings call, "We are accelerating capital investments in our American facilities to limit potential tariff exposure while maintaining our commitment to the farming communities we've served for nearly 2 centuries." Second, Deere sought direct dialogue with the Commerce Department to secure product-specific tariff exemptions based on agricultural necessity and limited domestic production alternatives for specialized equipment. Under the first Trump administration, thousands of steel and aluminum importers had secured temporary exemptions under Section 232, and Deere's government affairs team hoped similar carve-outs could be negotiated for agricultural equipment components essential to American food security. These discussions were ongoing, but early indications suggested the administration was reluctant to grant broad exclusions for machinery, fearing political backlash from the president's inner circle, who viewed any exemptions as undermining their negotiating leverage with trading partners. Third, Deere was exploring supply chain reconfiguration, sourcing more components domestically or shifting production of parts to other tariff-neutral countries like Canada or low-tariff European partners with established manufacturing capabilities and favorable trade relationships. However, restructuring supplier networks and obtaining new certifications could take months or years, too slow to address an imminent tariff deadline that threatened to disrupt the upcoming planting season when farmers most needed reliable equipment. John Deere wasn't alone in its predicament, as General Motors, Volvo Cars, Caterpillar, and dozens of other manufacturers suspended guidance or withdrew annual forecasts due to tariff uncertainty that made financial projections virtually impossible. According to a Reuters survey, industry analysts warned that the chaos in trade policy was freezing corporate investment decisions across sectors, automotive, aerospace, electronics, and beyond, as executives waited for clarity before committing capital to production facilities that might soon face punitive import taxes. On April 29th, GM entirely revised its profit outlook for 2025 downward, despite first-quarter results exceeding expectations, precisely because, as GM CEO Mary Barra stated, "We have absolutely no visibility into the trajectory our trade policies will take in the coming quarters, making planning for production and sourcing virtually impossible." Similarly, UPS and FedEx maintained cautious shipping volume projections, fearing unpredictable import surcharges would disrupt global freight flows and potentially trigger retaliatory measures from trading partners that would further complicate cross-border commerce. Wall Street's reaction to mounting trade tensions was predictably negative, with the S&P 500 Industrial Index declining 7% in April alone as investors grappled with the implications of radical trade policy shifts for companies deeply integrated into global supply chains. Agricultural equipment stocks were particularly hard hit, with Deere shares falling 12% despite strong underlying demand for farm machinery, reflecting investor concerns about margin compression and market disruption should full tariffs be implemented without exemptions. Rural banks reported increasing caution in agricultural lending, with loan officers requiring additional collateral and more conservative revenue projections for farm operations, planning major equipment purchases that might be subject to retroactive tariffs or significant price increases. The irony wasn't lost on agricultural economists who noted that policies ostensibly designed to protect American manufacturing were instead creating paralysis in equipment purchases, potentially hurting the very heartland constituencies that had supported Trump's return to office. By early May, the standoff between Trump's aggressive trade agenda and the realities of modern manufacturing had created untenable uncertainty throughout agricultural supply chains, from steel mills and component manufacturers to equipment dealers and ultimately the farmers themselves. Agricultural associations began warning that equipment shortages could impact the fall harvest if planting equipment repairs and replacements were delayed due to tariff concerns, potentially reducing crop yields at a time when global food security remained precarious. Commodity futures markets began pricing in this uncertainty, with corn and soybean contracts for future delivery rising on concerns about potential harvest disruptions and increased production costs that would be passed along to consumers in everything from breakfast cereals to livestock feed. The White House appeared caught between competing priorities, maintaining a tough stance on trade while facing mounting pressure from agricultural states that formed the backbone of the president's electoral coalition and expected policies that would support rather than undermine farm profitability. Behind the scenes, negotiations intensified between industry representatives, agricultural organizations, and administration officials searching for compromise solutions that could preserve manufacturing jobs while ensuring farmers' access to essential equipment at viable price points. Proposed compromises included phase-in periods for tariffs, temporary exemptions for agricultural machinery, tax credits for farmers purchasing equipment affected by tariffs, and transition assistance for manufacturers repatriating production to American facilities. These discussions revealed the fundamental tension between nationalist trade policies and the complex reality of global manufacturing, where decades of optimization had created intricate supply networks that couldn't be unraveled overnight without significant economic disruption. The John Deere case highlighted how even the most iconic American brands operated as global enterprises, balancing domestic manufacturing with international sourcing and production to remain competitive in markets where customers demanded both cutting-edge technology and affordable prices. As May progressed, administration officials began signaling potential flexibility on implementation timelines, suggesting a more nuanced approach to tariffs that would give manufacturers like Deere time to adjust supply chains while avoiding immediate price shocks for agricultural customers. This evolving situation stands as a microcosm of the broader challenges in reconciling economic nationalism with the realities of modern manufacturing, revealing that even the most determined policy shifts must eventually accommodate commercial realities or risk unintended consequences that undermine their original objectives. For the farmers watching this high-stakes political and economic drama unfold from their fields and workshops, the outcome would determine not just the price of their next tractor, but potentially the viability of their operations in an increasingly uncertain global marketplace where policy decisions in Washington rippled through rural America with remarkable speed and sometimes